Okay, if you're just joining us, we are using Slido to curate an agenda here. You can add agenda items and you can vote on agenda items using the Slido. Looking at the doc, the top question is, what is the point of MetacrisisDAO? What are we even doing here? The second question is, what types of contributions are most helpful at this stage to bootstrap a community? And we'll just work our way down the list. So I'm going to tee us off with the first topic, which is, what is the point of MetacrisisDAO? What are we even doing here? And I'm going to give us 5 minutes to actually talk about that, and then we'll move on to the second item from there. All right, so I got a timer going, and I'll play timekeeper here. So what is the point of MetacrisisDAO? I learned from reading the book Impact Networks that convening the people and building connections between people who have similar goals and complementary skill sets is a great way to build a networked movement in the 21st century. And so this is kind of the playbook that I've used in order to start Gitcoin and create a community that funds open source software. I believe, from talking to Daniel Schmachtenberger and doing research on existential risk, that the meta crisis is sort of at the root of a lot of problems in today's society and 21st century governance. And so I think MetacrisisDAO can be a container for people who want to figure out how to address the meta crisis. And to me, the point of being here is to exchange information, to build partnerships, to build a movement. And so it's about convening the people for me. Whether or not this group is actually going to develop the collective intelligence to actually be able to make an impact on the meta crisis is, I think, an unknown question. And we should be figuring out the highest value ways within convening the people to upregulate the projects and the people who are doing serious work here. And so that's kind of my early thought on what we're doing here. I was hoping that by providing the space with the discourse forum and by providing a little bit of funding via Gitcoin, that we would be able to kickstart something that would be important here. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. I know that it's a little bit loose. There's room for other people to come and set up infrastructure to help push this movement forward. But if I had to boil it down to one thing, I think it's convening the people and asking the hard questions about the meta crisis, and that's what I think we're doing here. Open to hearing differing opinions, though. All right, now we get to the point.
What's the timer look like? So I'm Chris. I work with Daniel at the Consilience Project and the Civilization Research Institute, and I've been in conversation with Kevin and Stephen Reed here around, how do we actually get a decentralized collaboration going towards the meta crisis? So I just want to second a lot of the things that Kevin said, bringing the core people here and bringing the talent and the sort of shared collaboration. One of the things that I'm working on my end is, how do we get a sort of shared knowledge base where the people can start to coordinate on a shared understanding of the meta crisis? So one of the things that I think would be good for the MetacrisisDAO to do is kind of separate the knowledge base of what constitutes the meta crisis, what are the core criteria that we're trying to address, what are the crises themselves, and then mapping that to technological innovations and innovations in culture and things like that that would address that. So that's one of the things that I'm really excited by, the potential of getting a large group of decentralized collaborators to have a shared resource of like, oh, this is a way we describe the meta crisis that maps to a set of capabilities that we're either lacking or we have access to. We need to build capabilities that we don't have, and we need to utilize the ones that we have. So that's kind of one of the things that excites me by this possibility of a MetacrisisDAO.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chris. And I think so for those of you who haven't met Chris, he's going to kind of be a bridge to Daniel. He works full-time at the Consilience Project. And so I think that Chris will be our bridge between Daniel Schmachtenberger and this group in the meantime. So looking forward to building that bridge, Chris.
Likewise.
Yash had a great suggestion that people could just use the raise hand functionality if they wanted to speak here. So feel free to use that if you have something to say. We have about a minute left on this first Slido item. Anyone else have anything to add? All right, looks like Roger, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Roger. I live in Boulder, and I want to just riff off of what Chris said a little bit. And I think the biggest thing that I see from looking at the videos is the biggest first challenge is communication and awareness. And what's the most effective way to get your friends and family and people that are in your network up to speed without coming across as poorly. And so I think if there's a way we could get to a set of talking points and basically an approach. How do I get people that I respect, who I think can understand this and potentially contribute? How do I get them on the same page that we're on about trying to move things forward? That's my suggestion.
Yeah, so I know that one of the goals that Daniel, when I spoke to him, wanted to have a resource that's like sort of a canonical TLDR, and then you can expand down into all the different vertical and horizontal categories. And that's a resource that I think, working on creating over the next 6 months or so. Chris is actually writing a paper that I think can serve as a canonical resource for this. But I'm almost a little bit loath to try to bring anyone else in at this stage, because we just grew from like me and Chris and Steven to like 30 of us. And like, we got to figure out what the fuck we're all doing before we bring in more people. So I think we'll get to a point of building awareness, Roger. I just like, that causes me to pump the brakes a little bit. There's some questions in the chat. Chris, are you able to share your paper? I think you're in the middle of still writing that. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not, unfortunately, not at a shareable state in the present moment, but I'll keep everybody updated. Right now, the best resource is unfortunately and fortunately still the large swath of Schmachtenbergerian podcasts. And the Consilience papers touch on it a bit, but this piece of work of like the canonical description of the meta crisis is a bit of a distinct writing project and is still underway.
Cool, thanks, Chris. I do see one more raised hand. That's Matthew Walker. Matthew, you want to go real quick, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item?
Yeah. Just to I guess summarize on the topic. It seems like we're all coming together, understanding, getting a shared understanding of things, starting to map it out, get the verticals in, and then I guess the actual purpose will become more self-evident as the group grows and understands each other.
Yeah, I think so. We're kind of getting to know each other right now. If I had to play benevolent dictator and like really just YOLO it, I'd say the purpose is we want to address the meta crisis, right? I think that's kind of the selling point that we've set here. But there's a big like how do question there, because it's such a big problem, and so I think the purpose is, for me, pretty set in my mind. But like the how to get there is like the hard part.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. That's actually a really great segue into the next question, which is by CERV1. I think that's Carl. Carl, do you want to just vocalize the thing that you put in the Slido?
Hey, sorry, I'm walking around right now, so there might be some background noise. But yeah, I think that like right now, the first sets of contributions, particularly on the discourse forum, can help set the tone for the type of conversation and the level of engagement that we want. So I just think it's, part of it will just emerge from the people that show up and what they care to talk about. But I also think that there's some ideas here that we think would be most constructive in getting, a new user or a person who's maybe checked in once or twice, but maybe hasn't come back in a little while, to go to the forum and say, oh, this is actually interesting and the place I want to return to. Ideas for what that might be.
Sure. So I mean, I'll just sort of respond. So the question is, what kind of contributions are most helpful at this stage? So I'll just say that what I'm doing, what I'm doing is, I set up the discourse forum, I set up the Telegram, just basic infrastructure for us all to coordinate. And then I'm pushing Gitcoin to do a quadratic funding round for people who are putting in the work here. So trying to get some funding together. Also, the Green Pill podcast is something I'm contributing. I would love for other people to like plant a flag and create their own sort of contributions that that help this group move forward. I think it's sort of undefined what we layer on top from here. But I will say that Daniel, in the last episode that I did with him, put together a few prompts for how people can help out. So they're on this post right here. So could we make a taxonomy of technology and primary applications of that technology? What are the possible positive and negative externalities of that technology? And then red team the fuck out of that. You know, maybe that's a working group that establishes out of this group. And then organizing the taxonomy by vertical topic area and horizontal topic area. And then from there, we can take the best contributions and kind of upregulate them to get them in front of Daniel, get him thinking about them and giving feedback. And then the fifth prompt was just looking for funding for this group. So, yeah, I mean, I think that like Daniel's kind of provided us with those prompts of what kind of work is the most useful to him. And I look at like contributors as either working just straight away on that work for Daniel, creating think feel streams, I guess we're calling them, instead of work streams, because work streams imply that you get paid and there's no funding at this point. But like actually creating, like working on Daniel's prompts is like one swim lane, but then providing infrastructure for those who are working on those prompts is maybe another angle that you could look at this group. And the Telegram group and the discourse forum are an example of those things. The quadratic funding round on Gitcoin will be an example of that if I ever get my shit together to make it happen. So that's what I think the highest use of contributions could be. I don't know, Chris, you work with Daniel at Consilience Project. Does that map to your thinking?
Yeah, I think the idea that there are parallel work streams. One is just developing the thinking and ideation around the prompts, and then the other is figuring out infrastructure for how do you actually make those prompts into something ongoing and you know, perpetuating in the future. That seems to me, whenever I have a group of this size, that's the kind of main things I'm thinking of. Like, what are the capabilities that we? So when I think of what kind of contribution are most helpful, I think someone else asked the question of like, what are the skills in the group? What is so like what there's a frame of what's the willingness, availability, and skillfulness of the various people here. So like, what is in each individual here actually willing to commit to in terms of this, both with and without funding? You know, what are your needs? What's your availability in terms of time? And then skillfulness, like what do you have to offer? Where are you looking to learn? And then how can we, you know, solve that multi-body problem into a lasting set of collaborations that, you know, maybe localized in this group, or maybe they spin off. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
I think it does. You know, maybe in order to coordinate that, we should start a thread on the forum that replaces the big introduction thread that we have now. And it'll just ask questions like, who are you? What do you have to offer? What are you looking to get out of this? And where are you going to start? And then we can kind of like separate into subgroups from there. I don't want to provide too much structure, and I don't want to like dictate this, but I also don't want us to fall prey to the tyranny of the structurelessness. So that kind of brings me to this idea of creating a forum post where we coordinate I guess you called it the multi-body problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, so like just flexible and distributed hierarchy is an interesting, like, I haven't spent as much time as I imagine many of you in the DAO space, but like, where there are places where there are people to learn from and people who are seeking to learn and being able to switch those roles. I'd be curious about, you know, someone I think asked a question here of, is understanding the meta crisis a criteria for contribution? I think that's a really important question. There's some, you know, there's some sense that, you know, to be able to move this thing forward in ways that don't further externalities requires some form of teacherly authority amongst people who deeply understand it, and switching roles by nature of the fact that some people who deeply understand the meta crisis have no technical or operational capacities. For example, like myself, I'm a terrible operator, even if I'm pretty decent at theorizing. So, you know, finding those flexible and fluid hierarchies amongst people in a decentralized group like this is something that I'm always super curious about how to facilitate. So I'd be curious about where people are like, you know, what open questions that everyone has around the meta crisis, where they have confidence, you know, in various areas, things like that. I'm also quite curious about.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, the open question is like, who's a good operator? Like, who wants to run point on organizing things. I think that we're going to kind of need someone to be that hub. And I'm like, I got my own company to run, so I don't think it's me, but maybe someone will emerge. Let's do maybe one last question on this, and then we can move on to the next topic. Go ahead, Alexander Joseph.
Hi, sorry, Kevin. That was actually accidental. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thanks.
Cool. The next topic on the agenda is a Gitcoin funding round for the Metacrisis. So basically, the idea here is, actually, let me start the timer. Even though this is my topic, I have to be a credibly neutral moderator and put myself on a timer. So basically, the idea here is to use Gitcoin grants and set up a quadratic funding round for MetacrisisDAO. So basically, the idea behind quadratic funding, and I'll just explain why it's powerful using this site right here that we built called WTF is QF, is to basically set up a funding round. And basically how it works is that you have a matching pool. In this case, I'm going to aim to raise $50,000 for the first matching pool. And then you distribute that matching pool to the results of a crowdfunding campaign. And basically the way it works with quadratic funding is that if two projects get the same amount of funding, but one project has way more of a broader base of support than the other project, then that project gets way more of the matching pool. In this example, 90% of the matching pool would go to the project that has the broad base of support. So the idea is that anyone who's contributing to MetacrisisDAO can put up a grant on Gitcoin, and we can run a 2-week campaign in which we're all sort of politicking to fund each other's grants, and then there'll be a matching pool that's distributed via quadratic funding, ideally to the projects that have more contributors, and this pushes power to the edges away from the whales and other central power brokers, which creates more democracy in how these projects are funded. So that's kind of the idea behind quadratic funding. For those of you that don't know, I'm the founder of Gitcoin, which is one of the largest quadratic funding platforms in the world. So basically, I was hoping to just take Gitcoin's tech and put in a little bit of my own money and see if we can't fund and upregulate the most important people who are contributing to MetacrisisDAO. So think of it as like an emergent structure for getting people to contribute to MetacrisisDAO and get rewarded for the work that they do. And I'd say that while we're trying to solve, Daniel would say we're trying to solve it, if we can solve commoning writ large, which I think is like Daniel Schmackenberger's speech for how do we fund the commons in general, like how do we fund MetacrisisDAO's commons is like meta for solving the meta crisis, like one level up. So I don't know, quadratic funding is just what I know and what I'd start with, but if people have other mechanisms or funding sources, they're welcome to put those in the pot and stir them. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Floran, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Yeah. So I deny that we should not have. I mean, we are too early and immature to involve any kind of financial incentives. We should first care that MetacrisisDAO is an attractive place for intellectuals and thinkers and builders to be engaged in. And we should first figure out how to organize our conversation between these very diverse talents and perspectives. We should do that first. Yes. Thank you.
That's a fair take, and I just really appreciate that we're already starting off with a culture where people will respectfully push back on each other's ideas, and especially push back on me because I'm not in charge of this group. I'm just setting a Schelling point for you all to come together. Go ahead, Philip Sheldrake.
Yeah, on that note, I'll second that. I've just joined a call earlier this day where 3 academics presented their analysis of the proof of humanity debacle that played out over the last 2 years. For those of you who are familiar with it, it got a bit personal, a bit nasty. And one of their primary conclusions is that they didn't quite know who was going to make decisions or who was going to make decisions about who's going to make decisions. It was all over the place, right? So there are enough templates out there, courtesy of the like of MetaGov community, for example, that we can adopt pretty darn quickly, and then at least we've got something we can refer to. So it sounds bureaucratic, but it saves a lot of heartache in the long run.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks,
more than
Philip.
happy to help on that front.
So I think that there's a little bit of pushback on introducing financial incentives too early, and I think that that's fair.
This gives us time to raise more money.
Yeah, well, the market's,
Is another way of putting it.
right now. I would like
true.
if people are able to focus on this, and it's not just a side hustle. I think we'll get better work out of people if they can focus on actually making it happen. But I also see the downsides of adding financial incentives too early. Stephen Reed, go ahead, and then I'll move us on to the next topic.
Hey, yeah, well, just to speak up for the importance of some people having some money to like really think about this and drive this forwards. Like, it's great it might be we get lucky and there's like people with spare time and like skills and inclination to like play that role, but that also tends to be a certain type of person, typically in the West, typically older, typically male, and so on. And I'm interested, or something that funding does is that it means that a broader group of people have the possibility to work on it. So yeah, speaking up in favor of a QF round sooner rather than later.
Okay. I will drive the discussion forward or about the QF round, and that'll be something that I drive. And I think it's an open conversation between the people who are for and against it at this point. But maybe we can reach some sort of consensus on it. Stephen, the next topic on the Slido is from you. Do you want to take us through it?
Sure thing, yeah. Let's see if I can share my screen as well. Yes. You're seeing this?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So some of you might have seen this, this knowledge graph of Daniel Schmachtenberger's thinking on the meta crisis that I produced about a month ago now. So this is based, this is kind of all automatically generated using YouTube transcripts and then some OpenAI GPT magic to generate the definitions. And it didn't take me that long, but I think I think it's still one of the better resources on for people that like are maybe not so familiar with the meta crisis have started to become familiar with it. The main limitations are that it's kind of written in like custom Ruby HTML. It's not very accessible for other people to get involved with and add to. And well, kind of by design in this first instance, it just features Daniel Schmachtenberger, but of course there's lots of other fantastic thinkers on the meta crisis. So I've been working on, well, first to say, I think something like this could be like a really important resource for this community, and a way that where we can plug in all of our thinking that builds on all of the amazing thinking that's already been done, which is considerable. So I've been working on an Obsidian-based stack. I know that some of you at least will be familiar with Obsidian. It's one of the most popular personal knowledge graphs. And actually, if you like stick the markdown files in a Git repository, it turns into like a pretty good way of doing a collaborative wiki as well. So I've been working on an Obsidian-based stack, which also includes some kind of like Ruby and OpenAI magic. And so it's now basically at feature parity with what I had produced before. So you can find all of the same terms that I've currently just put into like three boxes: diagnosis of the problem, responses, or tech. Of course, we could choose to divide it up in all kinds of different ways. along with transcripts of about like 100 videos of currently just Daniel's talks that are kind of all, and everything is like kind of backlinked, cross-linked, so you can click on, I don't know, let's see, let's pick permaculture. You can see other like other relevant suggested topics, the podcasts that have mentioned that term the most, and so on. So I'm enthusiastic about one way or another finding some way of having something like a wiki, like a real multiplayer activity, where we can all be like adding and cross-linking our thinking. That seems to me to be a really core to a project like this that is of considerable intellectual complexity. Open to other, if people have like ideas of an even more appropriate stack than the kind of like Obsidian knowledge base in a Git repo, then I'm super interested to hear it. But I think I've potentially made quite a good start on something, and I'm happy to write a little bit more about that in the forum about how you folks can all start contributing to that.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I will say that I created a wiki at MetacrisisDAO that was meant to be sort of a similar type of thing, and I think MediaWiki is just too clunky of a technology for us to use. So we'll be looking to migrate MetacrisisDAO to whatever resource becomes the wiki. And the last thing I'll interject is that when I talked to Daniel, he had kind of painted this picture of, hey, instead of writing these like one-off research papers that we have to keep updating for different constituencies, what if there was a wiki that had a real-time cross-linked repository of knowledge, a taxonomy of the metacrisis horizontally and vertically, that the community maintained, and that became the source of truth for anyone learning about the metacrisis. So I'm paraphrasing what Daniel said to me here, but I do think that there's a lot of value in like just choosing one knowledge management system and really building out a 360 view of the hyperobject that is the metacrisis. Yeah, I don't know. So I'll just put that in the pot and stir it.
Just to add something more, I think we mentioned the idea of kind of following up on Daniel's prompts from the end of the podcast about kind of really diving deep into some of the tech, and then particularly this idea of like red teaming it and working out how could this actually go wrong. So I think there's one potential working group around people that are real experts in various aspects of Web3 technology on that red teaming. I think at the other end of the spectrum, in a way, I hope there'll be a lot of people that start hearing about us and maybe don't know that much about the metacrisis and are kind of beginners in this. And so I think there's also potentially a piece of work on producing like very kind of more like entry level, like accessible resources to get people up to speed and well, ideally to a level that they can actually contribute if that's their desire.
Thanks, Stephen. I see some chatter in the chat about Wiko, so just wanted to center that. Oh wait, Chris raised his hand, and I guess we're following that as a protocol. So go ahead, Chris.
I mean, we can go to I just wanted to pile real quick on Stephen's comment, which was that one of the things that Kevin, Stephen, and I surfaced when we were in our initial conversations was this idea of how do you bridge the conversations between folks who are really, really good at global catastrophic risk and X-risk theorizing and work with people who have technical skills in protocol design and Web3 and, you know, the whole suite of remote sensing, AI, Web3 tech, and how do you start to form a mutual conversation between those? So I'm actually curious about, my hunch is that a lot of people will be coming from a more of a Web3 background in this conversation, but I could be wrong. So how do we bridge those dialogues? Because there's a bunch of there's multiple diverse communities within each of those. Like there's a bunch of diverse communities within the X-risk dialogue, and then there's diverse communities within the Web3 dialogue. And so bringing those into some superordinate diverse conversation is also something that I'm pretty interested in and just resurfacing from our previous conversation.
I can imagine that we would invite like the X-risk community to join our community calls once a quarter or something. Like we can create like social interop with some of those other groups. Do people who are in the, oh, go ahead, Sam Hall. If you're talking, you're on mute, Sam. Maybe he accidentally.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So personally, I focused a lot more on the meta-crisis theorizing of how do we mitigate catastrophic and existential risks. And so one of the things that I was the most interested in here is putting together a think-feel group of people who are especially expert in Web3. I have a decent knowledge base for Web3, but it's not my specialization. And then I'm hoping that by leading that and putting that together, that I can kind of ask the questions that a 3-year-old would ask about the broader technical landscape and be able to help contextualize that within the risk landscape, if that makes sense. So that's something that I'm interested in helping to put together, and just wanted to throw that out there while we're on the topic.
Thanks, Sam. I'd say anyone who has an idea and they want people to follow them towards doing that idea, maybe the best way is to create a forum post and just see who shows up. So I'd invite you to create a discourse forum post, Sam, for that. Cool. Do people want to talk about Wiko? There's a lot of chat in the chat about it. If not, I'll move us on to the next Slido.
Sure, I can talk about Wiko a bit. I'm working on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll briefly share my screen and I'll guide people through. So basically, it's a holonic knowledge network. Basically, what that means is that it allows you to browse through categories within nested categories within nested categories. So you have your science space, and then within your science space, you'll have your feed with various post types, and I mean, there's a lot to go through there, but you then have things like you have biology, and then within biology, you'll have biochemistry. But then biochemistry can be part of chemistry as well simultaneously. So you can nest categories within multiple categories. And that's when it gets interesting because, of course, all these different units of information, these units of knowledge are part of multiple places simultaneously. But what it means is that you can also start thinking about experiments in governance or in economics where you have specific parameters for the science space, and then they apply down the hierarchy to the other spaces below, and then continuing down, applying below. So you could do interesting things with quadratic funding in that way, quadratic voting, etc. And then you can link any post to any other post, so you can create these maps of the way the various posts connect together. So there's also this map view, which allows you to bring up the different posts and how they're connected with one another, and you can add a name to the link, and then you can bring up the posts like this. You can also create like these strings of posts. Basically, there's a bunch of experiments and prototyping of ideas to play with collective intelligence and to use play. There are a few games, a few social media games, the Glassby game, if anybody's familiar with that, that allow people to take turns to explore various topics and the such. But yeah, I invite people to go on the website, have a look around. It's all open source, and if anybody wants to collaborate and explore some of these domains earlier, then we're happy to collaborate. So yeah, I'll stop there for now, and then we can move on to something else.
Very cool. Well, thanks for the demo. I think that this could be a platform for us to coordinate on, and I'm not sure if it replaces or augments the discourse or the Obsidian wiki that Stephen put together, but I'm open to exploring it, and maybe we can figure out what's next, or maybe set up like a basic MetacrisisDAO community on Wiko and play with it from there. So Lawrence, I'll let you lead on that, but let me know how I can engage there.
Cool.
All right. So the next thing on the Slido is Artem has a question about.
Wait. I want to nerd out on Wiko for a minute and
cool.
talk about the one thing I'm enthusiastic about is the way in which you can link any post to any other post is kind of like a magic superpower, right? That allows this continuous self-referentiality that allows you to directly create very specific rabbit holes of like, oh, I'm just going to follow where this line of inquiry goes all the way back to its origin. That might be a way of like creating particular rabbit holes to get people into the broad depth that is the meta crisis. Anybody else?
I think I think of the metacrisis as a hyperobject, which is to say like an abstract idea that you can look at from many different sides and you can see different things. And so like the ability to jump from like one vantage point of looking at the hyperobject to another one through the linking system does seem valuable to me, Jeremy. So I think yes. All right. Anyone else have conversations here? If not, I'll just move us back to the Slido. Okay, Artem, you have a thing on the Slido next. Do you want to tee us off?
Yeah, thank you. So, I was really inspired by the article that Consilience Project published. I think it was right before the first episode with Daniel. I mean, Green Pill podcasts, either first or second one. And I think he mentioned that article there, which is technology is not values neutral. So I can share the link just in case, so that you don't have to Google for it. So basically, sorry, I don't know if it was Daniel who wrote this, or maybe there was a team behind this article, but I think it's like really, really like profound. And so one of the ideas is like we really like underestimate psycho-social externalities, right? Like the externalities is like a very big topic, I think, in the context of meta crisis, but also not only this article is very good at like pinpointing this problem, but also there is, I think, a very, very cool I don't know, maybe you call it a framework, which is like approaches to design. And so there are basically like 4 approaches that were mentioned, and I think currently the dominating design paradigm maybe is nihilistic design that kind of neglects the externalities. And basically what the article advocates for is to transition toward axiological design. So I never heard that term before, but basically in this article there are 5 propositions toward that design, and I think that's super useful for like operationalizing the purpose of our community. Like yes, we want to address meta crisis, but how we could actually do that. And I think these 5 propositions are actually very, very useful. So for instance, one of the idea that came to my mind is, what if we do something like there's this Prime DAO, right? There's Prime DAO and there's Prime Rating, and that's basically they built a system for permissionless sense making. Like people can use the templates to evaluate different protocols, be that DeFi protocols or ReFi protocols, and basically Prime DAO is using Snapshot in a very like smart way to build ratings of different protocols in real time. So I get maybe just like it's my like wild idea that we could try to build something like that along or around these 5 propositions. Another thing could be something more like empowering, so that we could build some tools or maybe like courses, like some educational content that would empower other DAOs or other projects to actually manifest those 5 propositions, or like build new technologies like in line with these 5 propositions, which would hopefully help us steer the the I don't know, at least the technology space toward this so-called ecological design. What do you think about this?
Thanks, Artem. Moderator note, we have about 2 minutes left. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, I want to second that point, Artem, that I think there's still a crucial moment also in the DAO space and the blockchain in general, I think, where there's a certain direction it can take. And the more awareness we generate now when it comes to the meta crisis, I think will pay off in the later times. I mean, we see what happened with the internet, you know, and how it started, and the ambitions were big, you know, with the decentralization and all of that in the 90s, but it led to kind of like these big multinational companies. And now there's a different moment. So I think even if there's just like 1 or 2% where you kind of like direct that into the right direction, can have a lot of impact on the long run. So that's something I'm actually quite hopeful for. And I think it really needs connections to different subcultures or cultures that are around, you know, like when it comes to sense making or metamodernism or these kind of things. And I see the MetacrisisDAO could play a very important role in that, or I hope so, at least.
Thanks for the links in the chat, Philip, so that we can dive in on Prime.xyz and Snapchat. Let's see if we're going to stick to our 5-minute timer. We're just about up on this. Anyone else have any comments on this? If not, I'll move us to the next item on the Slido. Proof of end of timing. That's my iPhone right there. All right. Next on the Slido is a comment from Anonymous. How does this group move from theory to action to impact? Isn't that the billion-dollar question?
Yeah, that was mine, and it can be brief. I mean, I think we touched on it. Chris touched on it. This is Taylor. Good to see you, Kevin. I don't know how you make time for all the projects you do, but it's amazing. And yeah, this came from a chat with most recently with Benjamin Omni Harmonic, who's working on Open Civics, who I think a lot of folks here probably know, and just ensuring that, you know, as we see linkages and sort of the threads between these different groups and communities and projects, that there is a focus away from sort of, you know, mental masturbation, which I'm absolutely guilty of, and towards, you know, real action and impact that starts to solve the problems we all know to exist in the world. So kind of a meta on the meta on the meta, but I think, yeah, just moving towards, you know, demonstration of impact and really making change as opposed to theorizing endlessly, which, you know, is part of the process too.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit, Chris, on our call the other day. It was just like, how do we go from just producing more content, like podcasts on podcasts of people talking about the meta crisis, to actually synthesizing it, making it more easily understandable and moving towards action. So that's definitely a thread that I've got running in the back of my mind. Yeah, I'll just sort of put that out there that that's an intention that I have as well. Go ahead, Stephen.
So I would suggest broadly, probably, this call is bringing together two communities, like the Web3 community and the kind of meta-modern, meta-crisis community. The main challenge of the Web3 community is kind of creating solutions in search that are searching for problems, like just creating stuff kind of for the sake of it without entirely knowing like why we're creating it, because it's fun, because, you know, we're nerds and we like to like write code, and sometimes these projects don't necessarily have the impact, like the real world impact we would desire. I'd say the challenge of like the kind of meta-crisis, meta-modern community is that like it's so cerebral, and like there's lots and lots of talking and lots of podcasts, and no one, and get, you know, people rarely get around to actually creating stuff. And I think so great on Wiko for actually kind of like, you know, making some progress on that front actually as well. I'm pretty curious to dig into Wiko more, but I think that, but the community, there's superpowers in both of those communities, right? Like the kind of like building power of Web3 with intellectual weight of the kind of meta-crisis, meta-modern community. And I think someone else posted on the list about red teaming, and I think this red teaming thing as something that Daniel, you know, did say he thinks this would be a really good idea. It's something that feels like this is an ideal collaboration in a way for these two communities, where the Web3 people can get kind of excited about like, but we're going to build this and it's going to be great in this way and this way, and then the kind of some of them, the meta thinkers can like really pick it apart in like in a really sophisticated way and poke the holes in it. So I know there's been some forum posts on this as well, but that feels like a way of moving toward, action of sorts, of producing something kind of that is actually would be quite new, that like I don't think hasn't been done nearly enough in the Web3 context at least.
Thanks, Stephen. I see Jillian next. Go ahead, Jillian.
Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention just in relation to that question was I re-listened to the first Metacrisis podcast, and Daniel identified like 3 avenues that cannot be forgotten in pursuit of addressing the meta crisis. So the first one he talked about was human values and culture. The second one is the tech infrastructure, and then the third is the economic kind of legal social realm. So I think like I'm curious about like this relationship between the DAO and then Daniel and the Consilience project, and then like where does this work get sort of shared to the public? Is that sort of the Consilience project's role? Because when I think about how I can contribute, I'm an artist. I've got a master's in visual culture. I've been around Web3 for like a year, and I'm so excited by all the potential. And and I'm a college instructor as well, and like almost no one around me knows about any of this. Like it's still so like ghettoized. And then again, when I was in my master's program, that was really the academic realm. And so yeah, I guess like what we're getting at is like what's the praxis point, and then also how do we communicate about that? So if there's time, I think there won't be, but I do have like a proposition for a potential mascot for the DAO. So I'll just tell you what it is now. It's the Eomea, which is like one of the very first mammals. And so thinking about this this like mammal, not necessarily an ancestor to all, but its name translates into like dawn mother. But the way the mammals survived was by like cuddling, and they needed each other socially. And yeah, so I just think it might be a useful mammal to kind of keep in mind when we're thinking about what the project means, who it's for, and so on. So I guess I had to like comment, question, and proposition. Thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, so just make sure that we don't lose the thread. If you want to post it on the discourse forum, I think people can follow up there. There's 7 minutes left on our book time together. I think that I'll just keep working through the queue of open hands. And if we can all just make sure that we keep it, I don't know, 60 seconds or less, I think that would be great so that everyone gets a turn to chat. I think, Sam, you're up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, you got it. I just wanted to build upon what Stephen was saying about the red teaming and how Daniel had talked about that as a sensible first step in our order of operations, because I think there's really 2 things that are compelling about it for me, which is that it's a necessity for sustainable design. And I mean, in any project, if you don't get the pieces right on the front end, it costs a lot more on the back end. But in the context of the meta crisis, where we're talking about existential risks, if you don't get it right on the front end, there is no more back end, right? It can tear everything down. And then the other thing that I think is really compelling is that the red teaming is something that we can do even at the stage of resources still being relatively limited, because all it requires is our collective intelligence. And so anyway, I think that's a great place to start.
Thanks, Sam. Looks like next in the queue, we've got Roger. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, I just want to echo some of the comments I'm hearing about, accessibility. And I mentioned it earlier. We've got to have a way to communicate in a way that's accessible and that doesn't scare people off with our tech details. Okay, I've been an engineer for 35 years. I've worked at all sorts of places that are impressive. And the last thing that people want to hear is impressive technology terms and impressive technology places. What we need to do is make the message accessible and make people feel like, hey, I don't have to be one of the geeks on this call to make a contribution. So communication is key. And I think that in part of what that needs to be is, hey, Daniel talks about, hey, I don't want this to be doom porn, right? I don't want you to get to the point where we're all cynical. And it's easy for us as very smart technical people to do that. But we have to be careful how we communicate out to the world. What I do these days is advise deep tech startup CEOs. And the number one thing I coach them on is not about their technology. They've got that. We've got plenty of technology here. All right. What I advise them on is, how are you going to make your technology communicable as a solution to a problem people care about? Right. So there's the people bridge between, as Daniel said, the political socio-thinkers at the top of the stack, but also down that stack. And so one of the other things that I recommend that people do before red teaming is start with what I call green teaming. What do we like about this? Number one, clarify what you're proposing, right, to these investors or whoever, or these customers. Clarify what you're proposing, right, so that they understand, and let them ask clarifying questions. And then the next thing you do is what I call green teaming before red teaming. Green teaming is compliments. What do I like about what's being proposed? If I immediately jump into red teaming, I basically demotivate the person who's stepping up and making a proposal. So green team before red team, that's my mean. Right, and we all have to do that. And it's so easy when you have a high IQ and you have a lot of information about the tech stack to just jump right in with what I think is wrong, and you're just stroking your own ego when you do that. All right, stroke their ego first, right? So green team before red team. And if we just start red teaming everything, it's just going to disappoint and demotivate everyone, including us. So anyway, sorry to rant, but that's what I'm feeling here, right? Green team first. I like that. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Roger. Looks like in the hand raise queue, we've got Nicholas next. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Hey, thanks. And I'm actually the next question too about the culture. So, and it goes with everything that we've been saying here. So, I think that culture is sort of the foundation of civilization entirely. Like, we've started with storytelling and then started painting and art and all that kind of stuff. And eventually we added more and more meaning on top of physical material stuff. And so I think that's the place to start to actually make some shifts in the global consciousness in a way that like can point not just the people that are intellectually savvy and working on the tech and everything towards these problems, but point everyone towards them in a way that actually is like fun and meaningful. And I agree with what Roger was saying, like, green team has to, I think, come first to create like the safe space for people to feel comfortable and happy and motivated to even care about anything. And then out of that, and we also, like, the people that we are sitting here with all the complexity and focusing on these things, like, we need to understand what frame of reference everyone else is coming from so that we can sort of bridge that gap as well. And I think one thing that's happening with both of these groups that are here today is that we're building so much culture in a bubble that we're almost becoming like a separate entity. Like, if you look at like groups as like social organisms or something, there's like this divergence happening where we're speaking a different language. And yeah, and you know, it's not just that we need to know what everyone else is thinking or how they think about it or how to shift that, but we also need everyone to kind of participate in this solution process. The actual moving of material is to do everything that needs to happen to address the meta crisis is, you know, it's going to take a lot of energy. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicholas. I think we've got time to do one more. Sentry, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I just felt to add one more thing with this green teaming and red teaming. I don't know if we could call it like purple teaming, meaning that we are looking to the horizon, like over the horizon to the attractor, which is arising somehow, like with the Daniel's idea with uncertainty, or a general idea of uncertainty. Like, we don't know, but we know that something is needed, and that's way beyond our horizon. But it's the attractor is there, and that's also one kind of, I would call it now purple teaming or violet teaming. It's beyond our understanding. It's beyond what we can know, but we know that it's needed. So combining all these different type of dialogue, different type of putting things in conversation, I think are needed in this project.
Thanks, Sentry. At this point, we are out of time. I think that this has been, for me, a really interesting first community call. And I'm going to wrap it here. I'm going to stop the recording now.